Okay, welcome back. So as you know, we are at week 2, and today we're going to talk about research strategies. Many of you have taken Psych 204 last semester. Can I again see the hands? Who was with me? Yes. So for those of you, the first lecture is going to be just a reminder, and you're going to think to yourself, I know all of this. And I'm so glad if you're actually thinking you know all of it, that means I have done my job as an instructor last semester, so that makes me very happy. But not all of you took 204. Some of you are minor students and some of you are irregular. For that reason, we're going to go over these research methodologies one more time. And this time, we're also going to pay particular attention to developmental research, because all research has their own challenges, as you know. And there are different types of research paradigms that actually work with some areas of research better than others. And so we're going to talk about that too. So as you know, in scientific research, we are always trying to start from theory and we're trying to get to evidence. And in order to do that, we generate hypotheses. These hypotheses don't just come out of the blue. We don't just create them. They come out of theories. Hypotheses that do not rely on theories are kind of aimless. You don't have a way. You can't have meaningful discussions without having a theory that supports or that does not support your hypothesis. It doesn't have to support. But in any case, in the interpretation of your results, theory plays a critical role. And so a hypothesis, as you all know, is a prediction drawn from a theory. And research can test the prediction of one theory against that of another. So there might be two competing theories about something. It could test the prediction of one theory. As you know, theories describe, but theories explain. But most importantly, good theories also predict, right? It has to do all three of these things. And if it does these three things, describe, explain, and predict, it means that we should be able to construct empirical research that tests to see if the prediction holds. And so theory is important for that matter too. If there is no theory, and there are some cases in which we might be lacking a theory, it might be a new area, then we may start with a research question. We would still try to link our research question to past literature. It should not stand on its own. But in any case, if there is no theory, then we may start with a research question. But this is very rare. So why learn about research strategies? Why are we talking about this now? Research strategies helps us separate dependable information from misleading results. So, as you know, statistics is not perfect, correct? There's always chance that we found significant results due to chance. And if that is the case, then theory should be especially important in grounding us. For example, why would it be important in developmental research? Have you heard of something called the Mozart effect? Is anybody brave enough to tell me what it is? Yes? Very nice. Had you heard of it before? Yes. There's even devices sold to pregnant mothers. There are headphones for the woman's belly to make the fetus listen to music. Where does this Mozart effect come from? Is it the urban myth, or is there empirical evidence that supports it? I already have the answer here in the first bullet. They did do a study and they found that adults showed short-lived positive effects of listening to Mozart when they were solving spatial problems. This was a minimal effect. It was significant, but it was a tiny, tiny effect. And these adults were also solving other types of problems too. And they saw the effect on spatial problems. But based on this, entrepreneurs, who obviously their job most of the time is not to educate parents or be scientifically informed, but they're trying to maximize their profit. That's what they do. They came up with this ingenious idea of making these headphones and selling it to parents. It is very easy to con parents because all parents share one quality, and that is they want the best for their child. And that can be abused willingly or unwillingly. And so children, we don't know whether those children who actually listen to music in the womb are later spatially very gifted. But we also do know that there is some animal research which shows that hearing very loud sounds when they are in their mother's wombs can actually have deteriorating effects for the auditory system. So these should be taken very seriously. And if one day you become parents, even if you don't become developmental psychologists, when somebody's trying to sell you something and they're telling you that it is good for you or your baby, it is your responsibility, because you have all the tools, you've taken all those courses, to actually go back and look to see if there's evidence before you buy it. And you may not become parents tomorrow, but I assure you, you are going to start buying gifts for friends and cousins who have babies earlier than you have your own child. Then start practicing then. Don't just buy. And so that's why research is important, and developmental research is of particular importance because it has immediate implications for what we do as parents, what we do as educators, or what policymakers do to influence how education is given in a certain country. Individuals who work with children may be in a unique position in this case to build bridges between research and practice. Çok yaşa. And so, what is it? It is saying that teachers should know. But then think about it. I should know, but then it's my job to know. But then your high school teacher should know. Your middle school teacher should know. Importantly, your preschool teacher should know about research. Do they? And why not? It's because most of the time research is written in ways that lay people do not actually immediately make meaning of it, right? So it is again our responsibility as developmental psychologists, this time you might be on my group or not, to actually translate these results for those people who are the prime target audience, who are the consumers of this research. And if it is done so effectively, then it could affect children's development and well-being starting from very early ages at school settings. For example, we know that play environments can help foster literacy abilities. What is literacy? Turkish word for it. Evet. O kadar ama dudaklarını okudum. Evet. Okur yazarlık. Yes. Literacy abilities. It is important. It's one of those components of school readiness. What is school readiness? It is whether a child is prepared cognitively, socially, emotionally, and physically for formal schooling. That's school readiness. And there is research that says that if you actually use print material in play centers, it fosters children's understanding of print, their receptiveness of learning about written words. And this research, when translated into the preschool, for example, helps those children in that preschool to better be prepared for what's coming, which is formal schooling. So there are different types of observation. Two types we're going to talk about. There's this naturalistic observation, and there's structured observation. Naturalistic observation, as can be understood by its label, happens mostly in natural contexts. This is in contrast to structured observation, which usually, but not all the time, happens in the lab context. Okay. Now, naturalistic observations has the strength to display child's normal everyday behavior. However, structured observations have the possibility of allowing all participants, in this case children, to have equal chance to display a certain kind of behavior, the behavior you're interested in as a researcher. I'm going to give an example, and I think these points are going to become clear in just a moment. Here, conditions in naturalistic settings usually cannot be controlled. So the power of the researcher to control what's going on is much less as compared to the structured setting. However, in structured settings, because the setting is not typical for the child may display atypical behavior. And there's possible observer bias in both. Because wherever there is an observer, there is the threat of observer bias. For those of you who have not taken research methods, observer bias may or may not be a new word. But in case it's a new word, maybe those who have taken research methods can help us out a little bit. What is observer bias? Yes?
Observer can actually observe the behavior
Mm-hmm.
in a way that he or she actually expects.
Yes. Could be. Observer might be biased to expect certain things. And sometimes, don't you see it like, let's say Ayşe is very interested in Berkcan romantically, right? And they are in a large group. They go out to Mozart cafe here, and they are having coffee. Ayşe's point of view, because Berkcan is interested, Ayşe observes all little tiny behaviors of Berkcan that actually isn't related or directed at her to be meaningful. I think we empathize and understand Ayşe, don't we? I hope. Is there anybody named Ayşe in this class? Okay, next time it's going to be a different name. Sorry about that. Yes. So as observers, when we expect something, then we are more likely to think we have observed it. And so that is observer bias. Okay, so naturalistic environments usually are where the children are. So the researchers go where the children are. Some naturalistic environments could be the classroom, for example. We could go to the preschool on campus and observe the children there. These days, if you ask me in Ankara, if you wanted to observe children, the natural habitat has become shopping malls. And so over the weekend, if you find yourself at a shopping mall, you are more likely to be able to sit down and observe uninterrupted natural child behavior for as long as you want. Structured settings, on the other hand, are usually set up in ways that allow for better observation. We have one of these facilities in the A building, in the developmental lab, where we have a playroom, we have a one-way mirror, we have a control room where we both record and can observe both the child, and if the child is with their mother, the mother and the child dyad. And so that's a structured setting. Okay, so in collecting systematic observations, procedures vary according to research. Now, developmental psychology is especially challenging because of one reason. Our participants cannot give us numbers most of the time. You know, in social psychology, you're giving a personality inventory, for example, the 10-item short form. You give it to people, you ask questions in a manner they can understand. And they say, rate yourself from 1 to 5, 1 to 7. And they give you a number. I see myself on 5, for example. And you use that number. That number is usable. In cognitive experiments, it's a little bit difficult. If you're looking at, say, something like reaction time, then you have to record it through a certain software. In developmental psychology, children don't give you numbers. I mean, as they get into middle school, you can start asking them Likert-type scales, usually with smiley faces for them to understand better. You don't give lengthy explanations of what 1 is, 2 is, 3 is. You give, you know, a smiling face, a neutral face, a frowning face. And children can rate, but this is done less often. Usually what we do is we observe, we record, and then we try to make meaning out of it. We have to transfer them into numbers, though, in order for us to analyze them. Right? The whole trick, which is called what, from research methods, that word that you are never going to forget, the long one. Yes, operationalize. We operationalize our construct into measurable variables. And so, there are different procedures that we can use. One is event sampling. Event sampling is actually very easy to understand. It's recording all behaviors during a specified time period. For example, let's say I am interested in helping behavior. Do 4-year-olds help one another? Are there differences between 4-year-olds who help a lot versus 4-year-olds who help little? If I'm doing an event sampling, and let's imagine I'm in a naturalistic setting, so where might I be? Probably I'm in the classroom, because I want the child to be with friends so that the child is motivated to help, right? And so I have a coding scheme. A coding scheme will define what helping behaviors are. Am I helping a child in need when the child asks, for example? Am I offering help without being asked? Am I trying to console a child who is sad? All of these might be classified as helping behavior. And on your coding scheme, they would be identified as such. So you sit there. Yes? Is there anybody called Nazan in this classroom? All right. And so little Nazan is playing. And so every time little Nazan helps someone, in whatever way that is prescribed on your coding scheme, you basically check that and make a note of it. That would be event sampling. You're looking for the occurrence of an event, and every time it happens in a specified time period, you basically record it. Time sampling is recording certain behaviors occurring during sample short intervals. These are, for example, you look at Nazan for 30 seconds every 3 minutes. So you are not sitting down and watching Nazan for half an hour, or all the children, and recording helping behaviors. You're basically focusing on one child intensely for a short period of time, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and recording the behavior as it occurs. Okay? Okay. What are the strengths and weaknesses of naturalistic versus systematic research? Strengths are that naturalistic research reflects everyday behavior, meaning you are basically seeing the child at his or her most comfortable state. They're going to show you what they do every day. It is not going to be atypical as compared to their regular behavior. What are the limitations of naturalistic research? There is no or very, very little control over the observation situation. I have done many naturalistic observations throughout my graduate student career. And the problem is you get there, you think that you're going to observe play. Oh, the teacher decides to do a finger painting activity all of a sudden. So the context change, and you have no control over what do. You come tomorrow. That's usually what happens. And so it is actually very much a context in which you have very little control. Observer bias and observer influence are limitations of naturalistic research. However, these limitations are actually shared with systematic research as well. Observer bias, we talked about it. Observer influence, the fact that you are observing someone might change their behavior. Not might, it usually does. And so in naturalistic observations, what we usually do is that we try to blend in. And so if you're going to go to a preschool classroom, start observing children, it is very unwise to walk in the door, sit down, and start recording. Usually what we do is we spend a few days in the classroom for the children to get used to us. And they start forgetting that we are strangers. Yeah? And so you sit there, you start doing your own thing, and you do whatever you're going to do in the following days. You might actually play a little bit to get to know the children, but then usually we tell them, I have homework to do. My teacher gave me a lot of homework, and so I'm going to sit here and quietly do my homework while you play. and then they're okay with it. And so a few days later, you can start observing. Let's talk about systematic observation. The strength is the equal opportunity to display behaviors. Meaning what? Meaning that each child gets a chance to display the behavior you're interested in assessing. Yes, I'm going to give the example right after this. The limitation is it may not yield typical behaviors. Obviously, the child is in an unfamiliar context. It could be a lab, for example. If they come to the lab, what do? We play with them. We play with them for about 10 minutes or so, or until the child feels comfortable. And how do you know that the child feels comfortable? It is actually very easy to tell. The child becomes more relaxed. They start initiating conversation. They exchange objects with the experimenter. For example, they start accepting things that the experimenter gives, and they start giving things back to the experimenter, and they become more verbal. Once that happens, we know that we are safe to proceed. But you need to take the time to establish that trust with the child. Because if you don't, all the testing you do is kind of useless. The child will not display their true performance. You will be testing something else. You will be testing the restricted behaviors of a very anxious child. And that is not what you want to do as a researcher. You may be able to maybe also decrease the observer influence, because you may use less obtrusive methods. For example, you may use hidden cameras, hidden microphones. For example, in our lab, we have several hidden microphones. And even if the parent and the child whisper to one another, you can actually whisper to one another, you can actually very clearly hear them and record it. So you don't have to be there like writing. That's what you do at the preschool. If you're doing it naturalistic, and I've tried many times to do this play because I was a part of a project that actually did this. So my job for months was to do this with an army of other graduate students. We would go sit down and record. And of course, like I'm sitting in the middle of the play area and children are playing and I'm furiously trying to write. Recording doesn't work all that well unless you put microphones on the child. Because as you know, we have selective attention, but the microphones don't, right? So what you hear clearly, actually a classroom, a preschool classroom, is an extremely loud place. It is. One day, Emre Bey will also take little Toprak to preschool. And maybe Emre Bey, maybe his wife, is going to sit there for a day and try to, he's looking at the time to see if he's going to cut this out. They're going to basically try to wait it out until he gets used to it so they can leave him there. Parents who go and sit at the preschool to wait until their children adjust always have a headache. Preschools, for that reason, always have painkillers on hand. It is loud. You get used to it. But it is very loud. But the thing is, that loudness makes it very difficult to just put a tape recorder and leave. Because you get so much noise, and it's very meaningless when you listen to it a day later. And so the observer influence in naturalistic might actually be a little bit more because you can't hide yourself well. But in the systematic observation, especially in a lab setting, you may be able to hide yourself well and be less intrusive. Here's an example. This is testing children's attachment and helping behavior. So this was actually the research of a professor of mine, not my own advisor, but another professor in my department when I was a graduate student, Debbie Liable. And Dr. Liable wanted to see children's helping behavior, and she was also interested in their attachment status. These were young children, 2.5-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. They came to the lab, and what did they do? They basically, the experimenter, who becomes very friendly with the child likes the experimenter, brings out this teddy bear. It's a nice fuzzy teddy bear. What the child doesn't know is that the experimenters have cut the head of the teddy bear beforehand and it's just hanging by a thread. And so they give it to as they're giving it to the child, they say, hey, look, this is my favorite toy. Do you want to see? And as they hand it to the child, the head falls off. Ay, traumatic, isn't it? Yes. And then this was actually, I was very happy I wasn't doing this research, because there's that awkward few minutes where the experimenter has to do nothing but look sad. And so the child is there. So you are trying to then code the child's behavior. Will the child try to verbally help? Will the child try to physically help? Will the child act as if nothing has happened? And they do all these three things, by the way. It's very interesting research. You might wonder, so we're going to talk about ethics at the end of the class. Is this a traumatic experience for these young kids? Well, at that point in time, I mean, it's not traumatic enough that it's going to affect their psyche for the rest of their lives, but researchers also make up for it. At the end of the experiment, a same researcher comes back with an unaltered teddy bear, and says, here, I fixed it, it's good like new, thank you very much, or whatever, so that the child feels better. But what does this experiment? So this is hard to do. You're going to get all of those little children into the lab. You're going to establish trust with them. You're going to give them this teddy bear, the head will roll off. You're going to stand there awkwardly for a few minutes, right? You're going to code all this behavior. Why are they going into such trouble? Because it affords them the ability to compare children better. Because every child has had the same chance to help, right? Imagine if you went to the preschool classroom and you're looking at helping behavior. What happens if it's a day when few children need help? So there are less opportunities for the children you're observing to help others. Are they just going to get zeros because of that? But they weren't given the opportunity. In all fairness, in defense of these naturalistic studies, usually people don't go one day. You at least collect from 3 or 5 separate days on different times so that you get a better understanding. But in any case, this is why researchers sometimes go to great lengths to do lab research. Okay, observer bias we already talked about. Observer influence we already talked about, so I'm going to pass those two. And we come to self-reports, clinical interviews. These, in my area, we use less. It's not because they're not useful. They're actually very cumbersome. They require a lot of effort, a lot of attention. But they also, everything has a pro and a con. The advantage to this method is that it gives you in-depth understanding. It might actually provide you with insight that you didn't have before you started the study. And so this is basically flexible conversational interviews where there is a set number of questions, usually it's semi-structured, but you select the questions according to the answers the person is giving, and you might actually ask new open-ended questions too. So it basically allows you to understand what that person is thinking or feeling in depth. The limitations, okay, accuracy of participants' expressions. Now here, how accurate are the participants, or do they have any bias to present themselves in a certain way? So let's say I go to parents and I ask them about discipline. And in this interview, I have questions about spanking. By the way, spanking is, what is it in Turkish? Birisi şaplak mı dedi? Yes. Yes, and it's usually to the popo. Let's not go, spanking is not like beating a child on the head. Spanking is something else. So spanking, you know, other types of corporal punishment, other types of punishment, withdrawing of privileges, timeout, whatever. So let's say I'm interested in discipline. And I go meet these mothers. I sit down with them and I have an interview. The mother may actually withhold information because they don't want to come across to me as someone who's overly punitive, right? So you might have that kind of accuracy problem. But if the mother was anonymous and if this was on paper, maybe she would feel more free to actually tell their own feelings. There could also be distortions in participants' recall and judgment, so selective memory. Though selective memory is a problem of both clinical interview. Anytime you ask someone something, instead of observing them, you run into this issue of selective memory. The flexibility, the open-endedness, may make responses too varied, which means, so you remember, you get these narrative responses, you have to turn them into numbers at the end if you want to compare them. So turning them into numbers is going to prove more difficult if they are these open-ended responses. Like I asked you, like, do you feel ready? Or do you feel that someday you want to be a mother or a father? Correct? In the first class. Open-ended question. I read your answers, by the way, and thank you so much for being so honest. So these are basically taking place of the assignments that nobody liked. I probably taught 200, 250 students in developmental psychology over the past years. Not one person liked the assignments. Hence the revision to them. But I feared that I may get superficial answers. That wasn't the case. You guys were all very honest, and I really thank you. As I said, your confidentiality is prime to me. But there were so many varied answers. There are answers, in my mind I grouped them. Actually, Bahar is right now grouping them, the TA, and we are going to see a pie chart looking at percentages. But there are those who, for example, said what? Babies are so cute, they're adorable. This is not one answer. There were more than a few people who talked about cuteness, adorableness. And so why would someone not want to have kids? There were some people who treated this as a biological thing and said, this is biologically normal, so I should become a mother or a father. Yes. There were others who were more, for example, in doubt. They said, if I can get to the level of responsibility I need to, I may think about having a child because I think it's very fulfilling. There were quite a number who were also influenced by the political climate, not just of our country, but of the whole world, basically, going nuts. And they said, I don't know if it makes sense to bring a child into such an uncertain world. And these weren't, again, one or two people, there were more. And so I could, at the end, in my mind, classify. There were also some miscellaneous. I put them in the other category, either because they were too personal. But the thing is, as you can see, they don't come readily. What if I had asked you this? Would you like to be a mother or a father? Yes, no. And then a second question, why would you like to be a mother? Babies are cute. Babies are adorable. It's a biological necessity. This, that. So I could actually give you this too. But then it also takes away from your ability to respond in multiple ways. Because those people who talked about how babies are cute actually also said, I don't know if I'll be responsible enough to take care of a baby. So it allowed for these flexible responses as well. Refia, can I share the last sentence of your answer? She writes, I had to look at her name, I hope I still want to have a child after this class. Smiley face. Yes, this class is not meant for population control. This class is to help you become better parents also, if you one day want to become parents.
But you said that most of them who want to be a parent, at the end of the class, they don't want. That's why I...
It's important, I mean, it's one of the most wonderful things in the whole wide world that you can experience in your lifetime. But it's very important to go into it prepared. We are going to see it's one of the most stressful events of a person's life, that first child. Second too, but it actually is one of the hardest experiences for a marriage. We will talk about it later. But babies do not bring couples together. Couples who are already together, well-functioning, understanding, they know what cooperation is, thrive, they get better. But if a husband and a wife are already having a lot of problems, babies already also add stress to that relation. The strain becomes even greater. So contrary what Turkish movies say, yes, evliliğimi kurtarmak için çocuk yaptım. Yes, I had a child in order to save my marriage, isn't actually the best idea. So it's not to deter you, it's to tell you that you should be prepared for what's to come. What's to come is beautiful, but also challenging at the very same time. Okay. Yes.
It's more stressful if the couple is not married.
Of course. Why? Yes. Yes. I mean, there are a lot of studies that look at single mothers. There are fewer cases of single fathers. Single fathers are usually single because the mother has mostly passed away. But single mothers are usually, they never married the child's father. They didn't think about it. They didn't want to. Sometimes they're career women, late career women who wanted to have a child, but they didn't have a stable relationship. In any case, these are also in societal norms a little bit atypical, especially say in our country. So being a single mother being a mother is a lot of stress. Being a single mother is much harder. And what makes those mothers experience less stress and be successful is social support. Grandmothers are an exceptional source of support, for example. There's also a lot of research that looks at child outcomes of single mothers. For those children whose grandmothers are very active in their lives and they have single mothers, and even if the single mother is young, teenage mothers, because that's also a reality. So there's a 16-year-old who's a single mother, mostly in other countries. In our country, that 16-year-old usually gets married. But they found that those children whose grandmothers are more involved actually fare better. They have better academic outcomes. That's good. And so, okay, I didn't talk about that very last, I think, bullet. Effects of variable rapport. This is not rapport, it's rapport. And rapport is a clinical term. What is rapport? Does anybody know? It is that relation that you establish with a person. Usually it's between a therapist and a client, but it can also be between an interviewer and an interviewee, right? And it's I don't know how you would say it, but I think in everyday language, you know, sometimes you say you clicked, right, with a person. It starts becoming very easy to talk to that person. That's the rapport. You feel trust. You feel comfortable talking to that person. And that's what it is. And in clinical interviews, you need to establish rapport. You need to do that if you're testing children too. Anytime you're face to face with a participant and the participant's answers depend on your actions, you actually kind of need to build rapport. Self-reports, structured interviews, tests and questionnaires. I like them, but I can use them very little, unfortunately. I wish all my research could be this. Each participant here is asked the same questions in the same way, not necessarily in the same order. We learned about counterbalancing, correct? This eliminates interviewer bias. It is efficient, and you get answers from entire group at the same time. Imagine if I had held individual interviews with each of you about whether you wanted to become a parent or not. Instead, I gave you a question. If I had given you questions where you could just self-report, especially in kind of structured liquor type style formats, it would be even more efficient, correct? So I did the middle ground. What are the limitations? There can still be inaccurate reporting. Language competence is always a factor. People may misinterpret the questions. Now, imagine I'm giving, usually I give most of these questionnaires to parents, not to children. in order to understand their parenting styles, their views. But parents have different educational backgrounds. They may be very proficient in language, or they may be so-so. So I need to basically ask my questions in ways that a person with minimal education can understand with no trouble. Because if I'm having trouble reaching those participants who have fewer years of schooling, then my results are going to be biased, correct? So this is a limitation. Another one is they may still represent more or less favorable views that do not correspond to reality, they being the participants here. They may still find it hard to, for example, say, I use a lot of physical punishment with my child. You still have that problem. And it's not as in-depth as clinical interviews. There also are neurobiological methods. And we have learned so much in the past 30 years, thanks to them. This usually measures relationships between nervous system processes and behavior. So we are always trying to understand the roots of people's competences, abilities, and behavior, correct? Sometimes looking at their behavior is one manifestation of it. But also, we now have the ability to actually look at the functioning of the brain. And does it provide all answers? No. Is it possible? So should everybody who does behavioral research pack and go home? No. And neuroscientists and neuropsychologists will tell you that that's actually not a good idea either. Years ago, 15, 20 years ago, some people did get very excited and think, okay, we won't need behavioral data anymore. But then it became obvious that in order to interpret the neurological data that we get, we need the behavior as a component of it too. So they tell a complementary story. And for that reason, the fact that now we have these methods is a great thing. And we should use them in ways that complement what we already know and what we can figure out through behavioral measures too. Yes. And measures of, by the way, it's not only about looking at the brain, but we can also look at other physiological measures too. We can look at heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, pupil dilation, and also the stress hormones. And we can use multiple types of measures if we're looking at the brain to actually look at either the blood flow through different methods or the electrical activity to understand when people are processing a certain type of stimuli, which parts of their brain are more active. And so we get different information through, as I said, looking at either the blood flow or the electrical activation. Now, what of course in the future hopefully will happen, now we can use EEG type measures and also look at event-related potentials, which are less intrusive for children. However, it's still, they're still having to wear a lot of gadgets, right? In the case of an fMRI, you actually have to go into a machine and you have to stay still. And so it is still the use is limited. And hopefully in the future, we will be able to measure this type of brain activity in children as they are not obstructed by any of these gadgets, but actually are functioning in kind of natural ways. Clinical case study methods. Remember that chapter we did at the very end, research methods, people's small n designs. There they come, right? Small n designs are experiments that are done with very few subjects or participants. And so this is usually in the psychoanalytic tradition, the clinical case study method. It's used in individual cases that differ from the average, and it brings together a wide range of information on one child. You could use both interviews, observations, test scores, and neurobiological measures. And this is actually what you do, not only for study purposes. You can write case study articles that instruct other psychologists, clinical psychologists. But if you are working as a clinical psychologist, the data you collect will always come in all of these formats. And your job is going to basically be to put them together to make a meaningful treatment plan. If you're working with children especially, say you're working with a child who has ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That child most likely will also have a psychiatrist, correct? Especially if that child is getting any kind of medication. The child, if they're very young, you may also suspect that you may want the opinion of a neurologist. So you may have that too. That child probably goes to school. You will have teacher reports. You probably will send a coworker to observe, or yourself, to observe this child at school and at home to see how the ADHD manifests. And so the clinical method is going to basically unfold every time you treat a client. And it's still widely used, both in practice and also in scientific work. Ethnography, this is a descriptive qualitative technique. And its goal is to understand not just one person, but a culture, a social group. And it's usually done through participant observation. You get into that group. When we say ethnography, when we usually think our research from the 30s, 50s, some 60s, where they go to the Amazon or they go to New Guinea, and they find a tribe that has not yet found civilization, and they live with this tribe for a few years. Yes, it's ethnographic research, but you can do ethnographic research with groups that you know very well. I may try to do an ethnographic research on Bilkent psychology students. Pose as one, at this point it's obviously not possible for me, but pose as a member of this group. And basically, try to understand the group, though. This is not to infiltrate and to divide. It is to basically infiltrate, but to better understand. What is the culture of this group like? What are their attitudes? How are the different groups within this group organized? What are the relations between these? How are the few male members of this Bilkent psychology group faring with all of this overload of female peers? All of these you will try to learn. Actually, there was research published of a sociology student last year, and he posed as a research assistant in several laboratories, psychology laboratories, that collect data from infants. And he then wrote this report on what he observed to be the best practices and also some of the weaker practices. He, in a way, engaged in ethnographic research. Yes, don't infiltrate my lab. But the student had not yet graduated, and actually that research brought a lot of reaction. And positive, I may say. Some of the weaker practices everybody knew but talked very little about. But infant researchers, very big names in the field, actually organized themselves to basically come together as a group and standardize their procedures. So something good came out of this ethnographic work. It is still being done today. So don't think of it as something that people did back in the day with tribes in the Amazon. And we may have run out of tribes in the Amazon that hasn't met the civilized man. I think now everybody, whether they're living in the jungle or whether they're living in the city, has an iPhone. Okay, so yes, I talked about all of this. This is a very good place to give a 10-minute break. I'll see you in 10 minutes, please, not 15.